the machine requires people who don't question it to run it. And the longer you're in the machine, the more the machine takes you over. We know what happens if you try to resist the machine. Well, they'll find a way to either criminalise your behaviour or certainly scandalise your behaviour. Is that part of it too, that one of the reasons why these people stick around so long is because they are no threat to the system when they have been the system for so long?
Exactly, which is the funniest part of Joe Biden's existence at this point. If you think about it, go back to the guy that he was VP for, Barack Obama. Barack Obama ran on hope and change. The whole idea was everybody before me was a racist and a bigot and the system's evil and blah, blah, blah. Then you have your years of Trump, post-Obama, and Joe Biden comes in. To me, that was the ultimate signifier that the Obama years were the failure, because Biden, before this presidency, had 47 years between being a senator. I think he was a congressman before that, and then vice president and everything else. He's been as big of a swamp creature as possible. So in some ways, his zombified presence, whatever it is that he is, when he poorly reads off the cue cards, or he calls on somebody that, you know, he's already got the question for, or he reads or poorly reads off the teleprompter, et cetera, he's the perfect front for the machine, because it's like nobody can look at him. I don't think there's anyone that's looking at this guy that is honestly like, oh, he's really in charge. It lends itself to the idea that somebody's in charge, but it ain't these people. And most of us don't know what to do with that. Like, what do you do with that?
You know, when you are 80 years old and you start falling, you don't get better, you don't get stronger. You go into your 80s the way you're going to be, and that's probably the best you're going to be. And so while I'm very sorry for President Biden that he's having this deterioration, I'm more sorry for us that if something happens to him, we're stuck with her. And the one thing that seems to unify us across partisan lines here in the United States is we don't want her. She's the last person we want. And what if this goes on, Paul? I mean, think about him. This is how he is right now, 6 years out from the point he'd be when he ended his second term, if he were to be reelected. 6 years. Imagine this man who is having trouble stringing sentences together, making sense, knowing who's alive, who's dead, including sometimes himself, falling down, endangering himself around every turn. Like, imagine that person 6 years from now, how he's going to be. And leader of the free world, right? The commander-in-chief with access to the nuclear codes. That's if he makes, that's best case. Worst case is, let's look at him 2 years from now when we're about to vote for the next president. And he has a fall right before the 2024 election. That would ruin it. That would absolutely ruin his chances if he had a bad fall right before. And the Democrats would be stuck with him. And then they're really going to be sorry that they elevated Trump, who they hate so much. They really better be careful about the game they're playing on the Republican side with Trump and their absolute refusal to entertain any alternatives to Joe Biden on the Dem side.
Former Trump White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney says it's time to introduce a retirement cap. All politicians should be done by 75.
There's a really good bench on both sides. I mean, look at the number of Republicans who are running for president. Look at the number of Democrats who would be considering a run for president if Joe Biden were to step down. There's good young people. Face it, the people at the top of both parties right now are well into their 80s, or at least into their late 70s. Nancy Pelosi is 83. Mitch McConnell is 81. She's in the House, he's in the Senate. Joe Biden just turned 80. Donald Trump is 78. There's plenty of folks in their 40s and 50s with 20 and 30 years worth of experience who are ready to step up. But there's a logjam at the top. And again, our system, and this goes to the part about depriving the voters of a choice, our system is very heavily favorable towards incumbents. The power of incumbency is very, very powerful. The number of seats that turn over in our House of Representatives each 2 years is depressingly low. So there is that power of incumbency that a mandatory retirement age would sort of balance out. But that's the reason we're having some traction with this conversation, is that everybody looks at these older generations and say, look, they've served well, but the folks behind them in line, 20, 30 years their junior, are really capable as well.
Mulvaney says the way to do this is to change the Constitution, something that's already been done 12 times in the last century and was done in 1992.
There's a couple different ways to amend our Constitution, but there's really only one way that we've used over the course of the last 200 years. And that general method is that it would have to pass 2/3 of the House of Representatives, 2/3 of the Senate, and then be ratified or approved by 3/4 of the state legislatures. There's other, again, variations on that. You could start at the states if you wanted to. There's ways to do national conventions, but those things have never really been tried. We've changed the Constitution 26 or 27 times, and typically the method that I've just laid out for you is the method that we have used in the past.
And with the race for the White House starting to gain momentum, the age debate is becoming an issue amongst the candidates themselves. Republican hopeful and former ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, has proposed a competency test for anyone who's 75 and older. That would apply to Trump and Biden.
The way you would do it is just when anyone files for office to run, they would get a notice from their doctor of a mental competency test. That's different than a health test. A mental competency test is, is a series of questions like name what town you were born in, or, say 4 words that start with the same letter, or how many grandchildren do you have? Like, there's multiple questions, and they would submit that mental competency test at the same time that they would file to run for office. It's not disqualifying, but what it is it's transparency for the voters so that when they make their decision, they have it and they know it. Just like we have to give financial disclosures when we run for office, just like we have to show, any sort of issues that need to be there, we should have to have a mental competency test so that people know whether this person is fit. And I think it should be done for incumbents. I think it should be done for any newly people that are running for office. But we've got to do this. This is concerning. And I don't like seeing this happen to Mitch McConnell. I don't like seeing it happen to Dianne Feinstein. But the ones that are being hurt are the taxpayers. The ones that are being hurt are American people. And we need to make sure that these people know when to move on.
And there's a number of polls that confirm Americans have had enough of God's waiting room. Time for this generation to move on. A CBS YouGov survey found that 77% of all Americans are in favour of a maximum age limit for elected officials. The Associated Press poll found that 77% of adults believe Biden is too old to be effective for 4 more years. And over on News Nation, their poll found that 80% of people are concerned about Biden's age, 62% are still concerned about Trump's. Sadly, ageing politicians filling the seats in the swamp is nothing new. Strom Thurmond was a senator who died at the age of 100. He did so in 2003. Now, he's the only senator in the history of the chamber that ever got to 100 years of age. But Thurmond was absolutely useless in the final 10 years of his life. Many arguing that his mental abilities had declined and his lack of physical stamina were clearly connected to how old he was. Now, never forget, this bloke was deeply controversial. He was a man who had, let's say, a colourful view on race. But one of the people who befriended this controversial senator, who gave a eulogy at his funeral after dying in office at 100, is the man who would like to stay in office deep into his mid-80s. Joe Biden gave the eulogy for Strom Thurmond.
But he also saw his beloved South Carolina and the people of South Carolina changing as well. And he knew the time had come to change himself. But I believe the change came to him easily. I believe he welcomed it, because I watched others of his era fight that change and never ultimately change.
This isn't about whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, whether you're on the hard left or the hard right, whether you're somebody who thinks we should have a completely new system. But the point is, when the workforce of the United States is quitting in their 60s, the idea that people remain more powerful than any worker into their 70s or 80s or even older is ridiculous. America deserves better than the swamp creatures who now are starting to stink.